Welcome to all of you cherubic terror-dwelling listeners to the DJP. It's Thanksgiving, so you know what that means. It means that my normal diet is about to get a little bit squirrely, and I'm going to be spending a little bit of extra time in the gym for the next couple months just to counteract all of the holiday festivities and accoutrements that go along with it. But it's all definitely worth it just to be able to see family and friends that I haven't seen in a while, and the ones that I have seen recently. Just to remember to be grateful. Because we all know the history of the holiday, and there's no need to get up in arms about things in the past which we currently have no control over anyway. So rather than getting upset about historical atrocities and genocide, let's use this time to celebrate our friends, our loved ones, and ourselves. Yep, you too. You've earned it. I promise. So on this episode of the Dharma Junkie podcast, my guest is author John Michael Greer. John is a widely respected author and blogger in fields ranging from nature and spirituality to the future of industrial society and more. John Michael Greer is the author of more than 70 books, including 16 novels, and he blogs weekly at his website, Ecosophia.net. He currently lives in Rhode Island with his wife, Sara, and we had the opportunity to sit down and talk about the occult and Freemasonry, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, making the most out of life, and oh, so much more. So join us on episode number 53 of the Dharma Junkie podcast, and welcome, without further ado, John Michael Greer.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. Using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
John Michael Greer, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Pleasure to be on.
It's a pleasure to have you. Man, you are one of the most prolific writers on the occult that I think I have ever come across. How many books do you have out on just the occult?
On just I would actually have to go back and count them, but I think it's something around 30.
That's just insane to me. That's such an incredible number.
It's actually really simple. On the one hand, I don't have a television, so the amount of time most people spend 4 to 6 hours a day staring at that thing. I have that time free to write, and also I enjoy writing. I like doing it, so it makes things much easier. I don't have to flog myself to the keyboard.
Right. Yeah. 4 to 6 hours a day. Is that what the average
That's what the average American says. 4 to 6 hours a day, sitting there with drool puddling in their lap, staring at the garbage that's on television. Wow. I don't know. Maybe this is kind of a hobby horse of mine. I know, but you got to think. Off there in the distance, when all of our listeners will die someday, and when they're lying there, on their deathbed, counting the last few breaths, I promise you, not one of them is going to think, "Wow, I should have spent more time watching sitcoms."
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. No, I would rather suffer the pain of failure through an attempt at something that I can look back on and be proud of, that's tangible, rather than the pain of regret of a life wasted.
Oh yeah. If you at least give it a shot.
Yeah.
Instead of just sitting there on the sofa.
Right. Just give yourself a fair shake, if nothing else. Like, at least give it a go. Yeah, you may fail.
Give it a go.
Why not? Why not try? Why not at least try?
Yeah. Get out there and live.
Yeah. You may not attain the thing you're trying to do, you may never reach it, but it's all about the journey for me.
It's all about the journey, and if you choose your journey, if you choose the journey, there can be some nice stops on the way. I mean, I have some large scale goals, but I also had goals like getting a book published.
Right.
I managed that.
I would say so. I would say you've managed that a few times.
Exactly, and so I can say, okay, I got that one done. I got a book published. I actually got some fiction published. I have some novels in print these days, and that was big on my list when I was young, and so on. There are definitely things you can do.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, as someone who has published 30 plus books on just the occult alone and spirituality, of course, what got you into spirituality and the occult? Like what drew you to that?
How did I get into this strange thing? Well, it's in a certain way, it's a very simple story. I grew up in the South Seattle suburbs in the 1960s and 1970s. Okay, when suburbia was at its peak. What a dreadful place. Everything absolutely plastic, absolutely one-dimensional. The TV, we were just talking about that, the TV chattering away about how wonderful your life is. I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah, for sure.
And so growing up in this sort of suburban hell, my interest was finding something that would prove to me that the world was not as one-dimensionally tepid as the media and the schools and my parents and everyone insisted it had to be. So with this in mind, I didn't know where to look, so I just made a beeline for everything weird. I was crazy about monsters. Back before monsters were fashionable, I was into monsters. I was reading books on UFOs before my age had gotten past single digits. I was into everything weird. And there was a lot of weird stuff, especially in the late 60s, early 70s. The paperback revolution was on. You could get books at the library on the strangest things. I loved it. I ate it all up.
Right.
But over the years, I began, as I pursued this quest for weirdness, I began to find more and more references to magic, not as, a plot engine for tacky fantasy novels, which I also loved, not as, something far away long ago, but something that people actually did here and now. I was going, seriously? This is interesting. This would be the coolest of all cool things. It took me a while to chase down some books on the subject. It was books. I was we say Asperger's syndrome nowadays. Socially inept bookworm was the term back when I was young, and it certainly was true of me. But I finally was able to track down some books and start reading them and start studying them and start practicing them. And of course, like everyone else who has done serious magical practice, it took me about 6 months before I stopped and said, holy crap, this stuff works.
Right.
This is not a role-playing game. The term LARPing didn't exist yet, or I would have said, This is not LARPing. This is for real.
Right.
And that was all she wrote. Because I was looking at that, and now, and you got to put this in context. This, by the 70s, especially by the latter half of the 70s, you had the sort of resurgence of fundamentalist Christianity. You had a lot of people insisting that spirituality consisted of believing what somebody tells you. Here's this book, the Bible. You must believe every word in it, even the absurd ones. Here's this guy in a dog collar yelling at you, telling you you're evil and will fry in hell unless you do what I tell you. And it doesn't take much before you realize that he's boinking his boyfriend on Friday nights, or what have you. Yeah. I was not impressed by the pop culture religions of that I encountered at that time. I was not impressed by the sort of low-grade Christianity being flung around by people and these sort of mass-marketed campaigns. Magic offered the promise of finding out for yourself. Not taking it on someone else's word, not believing a book, not believing a speaker, not believing a minister or a member of some religious hierarchy or other, but actually interacting with the spiritual realm directly, learning about it. Not an easy thing. Takes a lot of practice, a lot of development, and I was cool with that. I didn't have, being a socially inept bookworm, I didn't have a particularly lively social life at the time. So I was going, I can put half an hour a day into this easy. Yeah. And the rest is, as they say, is history.
Oh, wow. So what books, you said, you got your hands on some books initially. What books were like influential for you in
what were the ones at the beginning? Okay. The first two books I found, I don't even know if one of them is still in print. It was by W.E. Butler, who was an influential British occultist, a student of Dion Fortune, and it was entitled The Magician, His Training and Work. And it had a really goofy cover. This sort of starry field with this face with eyes closed and these weird symbols spiraling outward from it. I thought it was really cool. That was one of them. The other one was a piece, also actually a very good piece by Francis King and Stephen Skinner titled Techniques of High Magic. That was the one when I found that, and I was just going, oh man, the Holy Grail has just been handed to me. I was excited because it actually gave some fairly detailed instructions. Those were the ones that started me. In terms of books that were influential after that, of course, the most influential in the early part of my studies, Israel Regardie, who was one of the members of the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, back in the day, collected as many of the papers of the Golden Dawn as he could find in a big, originally 4 volumes. By the time I got to it, it was a single volume titled, somewhat unoriginally, The Golden Dawn. I got a copy of that. I spent more than a decade just, open the cover, climb in, pull the cover shut after me, just marinating myself in that book and in the teachings that it has in it. Some of Dion Fortune's books, especially the Mystical Kabbalah and the Cosmic Doctrine, those influenced me quite a bit. Actually, all of W.E. Butler's books, I ended up collecting the whole set, basically. And those were good. There was a guy, there were several very good books by a guy who went by Muni Sadhu. That was not his actual name, but his actual name was Dimitris Sudowski. So Muni Sadhu was easier to pronounce, I guess. But he wrote a book on the tarot. He wrote a book of concentration exercises called Concentration. He wrote a book on how to meditate called, equally originally, Meditation, and so on. And those influenced me very powerfully back in the day.
You mentioned the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Do you want to just kind of tell people what that is in case they don't?
Sure. Know? Yeah, in case. Yeah, I mean, if you're into the occult scene, you know about the Golden Dawn. If you're not into the occult scene, you've probably never heard of it. Okay. Dateline, 1887. A little circle of English occultists come across this a manuscript written in code. Well, fortunately, one of them, William Wynne Westcott, was a good scholar, was able to find a book from the Renaissance that had that code in it so they could decode it. It's a set of rituals for an organization called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Where did it come from? There are various stories about that. We don't really know. But they said, hot dog, let's do this. And so they organized. They were experienced occultists. Many of them were Freemasons. They knew how to organize working groups and lodges and things like that. So they founded this thing and got people together and got organized. It became the most influential magical organization of modern times. People in Britain, in the United States, in France, there were lodges in all those, or temples as they called them, in all those places. Most of the really serious occultists of the very late 19th and early 20th centuries were involved to one extent or another. They went through the rituals, they learned the techniques, they studied the philosophy. The Golden Dawn itself blew sky high in 1903. They had all this marvelous stuff, but they did not have a way to keep people from behaving like jerks. And so in the usual fashion, there were quarrels. The quarrels escalated. Things spun out of control. The organization blew apart into several competing fragments. And then Israel Regardie, some years later, came along, collected as much as he could, and published it, putting the material in everyone's hands. So that's kind of the vest pocket version, or the elevator version of the history of the Golden Dawn. And it remains that there are quite a few groups who are still working the formal rituals and things like that, but far more people who are simply practicing the system on their own. There's got to be tens of thousands of them all over the place.
That's interesting. I didn't know that there was still such a continuance of those practices. As far as the Golden Dawn was concerned, I didn't know.
It's the Golden Dawn. There are, as far as I know, here in the United States, for example, there are probably 30 Golden Dawn temples currently working.
That's fascinating.
And none, as far as I know, none of them can actually claim any kind of direct lineal connection to the original Golden Dawn. In England, who cares? You do the rituals, you get the results. Yeah. And over and above outside of those 30 temples, there are also lots of people who simply get the books or get some of the books derived from them, like some of mine, and just say, okay, I want to learn magic. Here is how you do it. Follow this set of rituals, study this philosophy, do these meditations. I get it. So it's a big deal. You can talk to, if you know the Golden Dawn jargon, you start using it in various places online, and pretty quickly you'll get, a dozen people pop saying, "Oh, are you doing blah blah blah?" And there's a lot of us out there. That's what I did for about the first 20 years of my magical work. I was focusing on the Golden Dawn. The first 10 really obsessively, and then sort of broadening out and do some other stuff as well.
Right. You mentioned that quite a few Freemasons were involved in the Golden Dawn. What is the draw? What's the correlation between Freemasonry and the Golden Dawn or the occult in general?
Cool rituals.
Is that all it boils down to? Is the ritualism?
It's ritualism, yeah, exactly. The Masons, your basic Masonic lodge, your common or garden variety Masonic lodge, has three initiation rituals: the entered apprentice, fellow craft, master Mason, and they're cool. They're well designed. They're colorful. They've got a lot of neat stuff in them. And you become a member, and then you go through the rituals, and then you can help perform the rituals. You can learn an enormous amount about ritual practice by just hanging out with the old guys who've been doing, these three rituals for the last 50 years. Right. And then there are other branches, other things that are sort of piled up on top of the Masonic wedding cake that you can get into once you've done those 3 degrees. And like the Scottish Rite has another 29 rituals. You want to get into those? We have them. Really lurid, colorful. That's it. Now, full disclosure, I am a Freemason. I am active in the Scottish Rite. I have been active in the Scottish Rite. I've been active in the York Rite, and I learned an enormous amount from it. I've also belonged to various other kinds of lodges, some magical, some not. It was a way to learn.
Right. Yeah. Well, that makes sense to me. If there's one thing that I do enjoy, it's the ever present quest for more knowledge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's basically, I realized in the course of my Golden Dawn studies that there was the people who designed this obviously knew something. They had some patterns and structures that I did not understand, and I figured this probably has a connection to the Freemasons. So one thing led to another.
I mean, it just follows, right?
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So it's spirituality. Like, what would you say? Well, I mean, where does your spiritual beliefs lie, essentially?
Okay. Yeah. In my case, from as far back as I can remember, I feel closest to the spiritual world, to the divine, if you want to say that, outdoors, in nature.
Okay.
That's always been where I connect most to the divine. Go to a church, you're locked up inside a room, you're sitting there listening to somebody drone on, or maybe doing an interesting ritual. You can tell I do occultism. But normally it's all very very insular, very cut off, very, very human.
Right.
As Nietzsche wrote, human, all too human.
Yeah.
In the natural world, it's another matter. In the natural world, things are open, there are forces and blessings and powers moving, and so it was probably inevitable that I would end up getting drawn into Druidry, which is in fact what happened. The usual complex, silly story. I was involved. I was still in Seattle in those days, and I was involved in helping to set up and run a magical lodge. We were doing a lot of interesting work together, and one of the other people who was in the lodge was also active in a Druid organization, the Order of Bards, Obates, and Druids. So we got to talking, and I said, "This sounds really cool." So, of course, one thing led to another, and let's see, that we really got started talking about that in the fall of '93, and then on May 1st, 1994, this is Seattle, so it was pouring down rain. There I am outdoors in a park in Seattle with 4 other people in white robes, and I'm in a white robe, and we're doing and they're putting me through this Druid initiation in the middle of a downpour. Again, it's Seattle, so that was my introduction to Druidry.
That sounds lovely.
But Druid nature spirituality has been it's really been my thing ever since, because it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that that you interact with nature as the vehicle through which you interact with the spiritual realm. That's just how I do it. I mean, there are different. Druidry is not a monolithic kind of thing. It's not a you must get out there and worship a tree or anything like that. Or you're going to be thrown into the abyss of slack or whatever it is. What is the old Discordian line? Turned into precious Mao buttons and distributed in the region of thud. But for those who feel attracted to it, it's a way, and it's been the core of my spiritual path ever since. Just this sort of sense that it is through the cycles of nature and the phenomena of nature that we get closest to the divine.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny that I never really even correlated the two, but now that we're sitting here and we're actually talking about it, I certainly correlated that I did not feel any spirituality while I was actually in a church. I figured that out pretty early on in my life, getting drugged to church by my grandmother. I was like, this just seems that something's wrong here. Like this, you know what I mean? I think pretty much the same exact thing you feel. You're like, it just does not equate. Something's not right here. But I never hesitate to feel that spiritual energy, you can call it God, you can call it source, you can call it, the universe, whatever you want to call it. But I never hesitate to feel that when I'm just sitting outside and I'm watching the wind blow through the trees. It's like,
exactly.
Like, there it is. There it is. That is where it lives. That's where it lives.
That's where we can come closest to it, certainly. And it's one of those things. The thing is, this is actually a very deep-seated American tradition. There's a writer named Catherine Albanese who wrote a book called Nature, Religion in America, where she talks about how nature worship, or orientation toward the spiritual through nature has been this immense thread in American and Canadian culture and all across North America. It's kind of in our cultural DNA. It's in the land. So I figure it's I have no problem following the same path that was blazed out by people like Thoreau and Emerson and so on.
Right. Yeah. Why would you?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, the horror.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. So you mentioned when in these practices there was books on concentration and meditation. Mm-hmm. Do you have a formal meditation practice that you do?
Oh yes. Oh good heavens, yes. I've had a daily meditation practice going since the mid 1980s.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent.
It's one of the things that too often gets left out from occult practice, but it's absolutely essential.
Right. Yeah, I think so. 100%. Mm-hmm. I'm a Dharma practitioner, so
okay.
And
gotcha. Yeah.
Obviously,
so you get it.
I meditate a lot. Clearly, I meditate a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you get it.
Yeah, and you really just unless you really get into a dedicated daily practice, like you don't realize the benefits that you can reap from that practice until you do it for a while. And if you ever stop for a reason, like you almost notice it immediately. You can really tell when you're not putting the work in.
Yeah. The handful of times when I've had to set aside my practices for a little while, and it's never been more than just a fairly short period, just a few days. Oh yeah, I can feel it. Dion Fortune, who I mentioned earlier, the English occultist, comments that after you've been meditating for a while, skipping your meditation is going to feel like skipping a meal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what kind of meditations do you do? As far as
okay. Yeah. There's a specific tradition that has been part of the Western occult tradition since the gods know when, which is called discursive meditation. It's a little different from the kind that a lot of the Eastern traditions practice. Okay. But what you're doing is, you've got the same basic elements of concentration and learning to still the mind and so on. Mm-hmm. Our postures are a little less awkward if you have weak knees, but we use chairs. But what you're doing in discursive meditation is you are taking a theme, which is like a short piece of text or a symbol or an image or something like that, and you are taking that, you're focusing on it, and then you are mentally unpacking. You're actually thinking, but you're thinking in a very precise, directed way, watching the movements of your mind as you unpack this symbol. Okay, you're looking at a tarot card, let's say. And it's the fool, and there's the fool, and he's got the dog chasing after him, and the sun is here, and the mountain's here, and the cliff is there. You choose one of those things. Okay, what is the dog? What does it mean? What, you focus on, and you start thinking. You allow your mind to think, but not in the usual wool-gathering monkey mind kind of jumping all over the place way.
Right. You're
teaching your mind to think in a step-by-step fashion, going from your starting point, the dog, to as far as you can end up.
Right.
So that's discursive meditation. It's actually something that I've done enough reading of Buddhist source materials. Some of the meditations that are discussed in the early literature actually seem to have a lot in common with that.
Right.
And so it seems to be fairly widespread. But yeah, that's the specific kind. Of course, we have all of these texts and all of these symbols. I mentioned the tarot cards. Many of these things include important occult teachings that are designed to be unpacked in this kind of meditation. And unless you do the meditation, you can't figure them out. You can sit there staring at a tarot card all day.
Right.
But if you actually start your mind going, it will start moving along tracks. As Carl Jung pointed out a long time ago, a lot of our thoughts, the basic raw materials of our thoughts are these archetypal patterns that are hardwired into us.
Right.
And you can start picking up on those, and they will lead you places, and eventually go, oh, that's what the dog means.
Yeah. And I'm a big proponent of the work of Carl Jung. So that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can pretty much trace everything back to archetypal figures.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. No, and the thing is, I've also done a lot of reading in Jung, and I find his work extremely useful. There's an ongoing kind of a friendly quarrel in the occult scene. Was Carl Jung a psychologist who ended up learning a lot of stuff relevant to occultism? Or was he an occultist who figured out how to make people think he was a psychologist?
That's a good question. It's a good question.
I mean, his doctoral dissertation was on occult phenomena.
Right.
And he was, among other things, I forget which of his students taught him how to cast horoscopes, but he was a crackerjack astrologer. He was good at that, and drew a lot of material from astrological sources. And so, you've read his stuff, you'll know. And so, yeah, he's a lot of people in the occult community read Jung and go, I see what you're getting at, Carl. Okay, yep.
Are you familiar with Jacques Lacan?
To some extent. I haven't studied him with anything like that, the sort of focus I put into Jung.
Right. Yeah. Me neither. I've only read a little bit of his stuff, but pretty fascinating. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of his ideas are pretty poignant. You just got to kind of do the deep dive into Lacan, and I honestly, I still need to do that deep dive myself because I've only scratched the surface of his work. Mm-hmm. But he was a student of Jung's, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. That gives me another reason to take a closer look at him. Yeah, I find that I really have to take serious thinkers, one at a time.
Oh yeah.
There was a period when I was really saturating myself in Jung. There was a period when I was really saturating myself in Nietzsche. Right. And just reading Nietzsche all the time and trying to get inside his brilliant but somewhat crazy headspace. There was a while, and so basically I'll kind of go from philosopher to philosopher, from thinker to thinker, so that means there are a lot of people I haven't gotten to yet.
Oh well, there's so many out there. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck even getting to all the ones that you want to get to, because there's so much. Most of them are so prolific. There's so much source material. It's just like, I'm never going to get to the end of this. So imagine trying to get to all of them is just unfounded.
Yeah. This is great if you happen to live for 15,000 years. You can probably, except the problem is by then you have all these people writing more stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Because it never stops.
It never stops. But Jung, I'm going to have to do Jung again sometime soon. I have a copy of the Red Book. I'm delighted to say I have the illustrated, the facsimile edition of the Red Book. And that's going to take some serious study, and then I need to go from there to revisit all of the rest of his stuff to see, because the Red Book is really so fundamental to what he was saying.
Right.
I'm going to have the whole thing has to be re-understood on that basis. So at some point I've got some work cut out for me.
Yeah, I just got a copy of the Red Book. This will tell you how unorganized I am. I got a copy of the Red Book like 3 years ago, and I've barely even scratched the surface of it yet. I just always end up. My problem is focusing on one thing because I guess I'm kind of ADHD in that sense, is because I'll get in one book and then like I'll find another book that's like just looks super fascinating, and then I'll pick it up and I'll start reading it, and then the next thing you know, I've got like 6 books that I'm halfway through, and I'm like, all right, now I need to pick which one of these I'm actually going to finish right now, and then I get into this whole thing in my head about making that decision. It just never stops.
Oh, I know how that goes. Yeah, so many books, so little time. I forget which writer it was in the early 19th century who literally burst into tears. He was sitting in the reading room of the British Library looking at this fantastic array of books, and he literally just started crying right there, realizing there was no way he could read all of them.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I feel for the guy. I really feel for the guy.
Yeah. I feel that for sure, man. 100%. I definitely get that. Just even looking at the books the stack of books I've got that I haven't gotten to right now of my own, it's like, oh man. And so looking at an entire library, so overwhelming. Because I just want to read it all. I just want to read all of it.
Oh yeah. No, exactly. I've got a big stack of things that I want to get to, and then there are the books that I've read once, and I know I need to get back to and read again because they're level on level on level, and I'm not going to get it on a single reading, and so on and so on and so on. It's just it never ends.
Right. Yeah. So I was checking out your website, man, and you definitely are still writing quite a bit. You wrote this. The last thing I think that you posted was the next European war.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that first.
Okay.
Like, what was your, let's just go. Let's go for it.
Okay. Let's go. The basics. I'm going to start with kind of some framing here.
Okay.
One of the obsessive bad ideas that we have so often in modern times is this notion that history doesn't really have anything to teach us, that, that was all in the past, it will never happen again, we're breaking new ground, we've got these new techno trinkets, and everything's different. And it's not.
Right.
It's the classic example, and it's classic because it happens over and over again, is the number of times, it's been 3 times now I've had a chance to walk through, or to sit on the sidelines actually and watch gargantuan speculative bubbles go pop. And in every single case, the people who are saying, no, this investment is going to go up forever, whether it's the stock market in the 1980s, tech stocks in the late 1990s, real estate in the bubble that popped in 2008, they all use the same rhetoric. And it's the same arguments that were used in the run-up to 1929. There's this great book. John Kenneth Galbraith wrote it. It's called The Great Crash, 1929. And it is the funniest, most side-splitting work of serious economic history you'll ever read. He tells the story of the bubble and bust in 29. It's hilarious. But once you read that, every time there's a new bubble, you're going to hear exactly the same things. It's a new era. Technology has changed things so much that we can expect these prices to keep on going up forever. It really is different this time, etc. Ad nauseam. Yeah. And it's never actually different. Okay, that's the framing. One of the things that we hear nowadays in politics constantly is that Europe has solved its problem with warfare. Europe has been, up until 1945, Europe was one of those blood-soaked places of real estate on the planet.
Right.
European nations were always going to war with each other, slaughtering each other, launching global wars. And the First World War was not the first of those, by the way. The Napoleonic Wars had, there was fighting in America, there was fighting in Haiti, there was fighting in India, there were naval engagements all around the world. World wars have happened for a good long time, and they usually start in Europe. So, but the claim is the European Union, it's all over with now, everyone's settled down, and they're going to be nice and peaceful until the end of time. And my argument is horseradish. Europe has been peaceful since 1945 for one very simple reason, or 2 very simple reasons. One of them is the Soviet Army. One of them was the Soviet Army. The other one is the United States Army.
Right.
After 1945, the U.S. and the Soviet Union split Europe down the middle, occupied the quarrelsome nations of Europe with massive military force, and said, "You're going to stop fighting now."
Right.
Now, we know what happened to the Soviet Union. It could not hold on. Its economic system was a flop, and it had to pull its troops out. That the immediate aftermath was a whole bunch of wars down in the Balkans, in what had been part of their sphere. Right. Now we've seen in Afghanistan not that long ago, the United States is not actually doing that well. Our economy is in deep trouble. Our military is not state of the art anymore, and we're running out of almost everything, from products on store shelves to the necessary desire to invade the rest of the world. And so the troops have come home from Afghanistan. The troops will be coming home from Iraq and Syria, and in due time they're going to come home from Europe. And when that happens, my prediction is stand by. There have been a lot of times in the past where European nations have established these complicated treaty organizations. They've established these sort of superordinate governments, whether it was the Holy Roman Empire or what have you, that were going to keep the peace in Europe. And they did it for a while. And then they broke down, and there was another war. I am expecting, well within my lifetime, to see Eastern Europe at least having a major war, and I don't imagine the Western powers are going to be, Western European nations are going to be able to stay out of it. So what I was trying to kind of caution my readers: pay attention to history, pay attention to these various trends that I talked about that are all pushing toward war, and brace yourselves, because if you assume that a big European war can't happen again, you may be taken by surprise, and you don't want that to happen.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a big problem just across the board. Is there's just not enough critical thought these days. There's not enough, not enough analysis of what's actually going on, and people just take everything at face value. Then they believe they have a tendency to believe everything the news tells them, when the news has been bought and paid for several times over.
Yeah, the thing is, the phrase that I like pointing out. When you turn on your television, there's a reason they call that what's on it programming.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, it's garbage. Okay, and in fact, it has been becoming more propagandistic, more one-sided, more distorted, more dishonest in recent years. This is normal when a society is in trouble.
Yeah.
When the United States was still fairly strong, when we had the strong economy, when we had the strong military, the media had a lot of wiggle room. Right. And you could get away with saying scandalous things because, nobody was worried about that. The people in power were saying, it's okay, we're strong, we can take that. The weaker we get, the more panicked the media becomes, and the more frantically they try to push, no, there is only this one truth, and we own it, and we will tell you what it is. And if we change our mind a week from now and all of a sudden start saying Oceania has never been allied with East Asia or what have you, you dare call us on the switch, because it didn't happen. We say so.
Yeah.
The example that comes to mind right now, and without getting into the politics of it, I think most people are familiar with the situation just a little while ago where there was a newscaster at a college football game, and everyone in the back was shouting blank Joe Biden.
Right.
Okay. And he said, listen, they're all saying, let's go, Brandon. And that's what he said. And he apparently expected people to believe him.
Right.
Not to listen to the Joe Biden booming out in the background,
right,
but to believe what he said, even though it was obviously horseradish. It was obvious complete nonsense. That's the attitude of the media in a failing society.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's true. Well, yeah, I mean, because it points to one thing, and that's that our that society is failing. And I think it's becoming more evident as time crawls by, but I mean, it's kind of staring us right in the face right now. And just so many signs pointing to it that you almost can't even ignore it anymore.
Although there are plenty of people who are they have their teeth gritted and their eyes closed and their ears plugged and they're shouting, I can't hear you, la, 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 la. You remember the way you probably did when you were 6?
Right.
I certainly did.
Yeah.
It's a very common habit these days.
Yeah.
But the thing that people don't want to hear is that every civilization has a life cycle.
Right.
Okay? It's born, it grows up, it matures, it ages, it dies, and a new one is born. Yep. It's a perfectly normal cycle. And the fact that we happen to live in a period of decline, a period where the civilization we live in is aging out, that's the cards we were dealt. It doesn't mean the world's going to end next Thursday. It doesn't mean we can't have decent lives or that we can't accomplish things. It just means that certain things are possible now that weren't possible earlier, and certain things that were possible back in the day are a waste of your time.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
100% an interesting time.
Well, the thing that keeps me thinking and keeps me going, this is kind of interesting. Back when I was a kid, I mentioned trashy fantasy novels. I was crazy about trashy fantasy novels, but I also liked some of the good ones. But it did not matter how tacky they were, how lurid they were, how many times we got rehashed the story of, some heroic young person seeking out the magic MacGuffin, which alone can defeat Blorg, the bad evil lord of evilness, or what have you. You know the story. Right. Yeah. We've all read it anyone who's into tacky fantasy has read it a million times. Yeah. I adored that stuff. And one of the things that you find in all of this that just pervasive whether it's tacky fantasy from the golden age, when Robert E. Howard was writing about Conan the Barbarian, or tacky fantasy from the 1970s, or all this stuff that I was reading, it's all set in periods of decline.
Right.
It's all set. There's always, Tolkien is that way. You have Tolkien, the elves are at the last trace of their strength, and there are all these amazing things that nobody can duplicate anymore, and da-da-da-da-da-da. It's all that sense of decline. And I think one of the reasons people turn to that and people think that way is the realization that as a society contracts, there are possibilities that open up for personal freedom. You cannot get them if you believe whatever the media tells you. You cannot get them if you do as you're told. But there's more wiggle room. There are cracks opening up. There are gaps through which you can wiggle and find yourself in a life that isn't supposed to exist.
Right.
I notice right now that, there's all this shrieking about a labor shortage.
Yeah.
And, millions of people have not suddenly disappeared in a puff of smoke. What's happening? What's happening in a large, there's a lot of things that are happening, frankly, but one of the main things that's happening here is that during the shutdowns, a lot of people realized two important facts. The first is that their jobs absolutely suck.
Yeah.
They were inadequate pay, miserable conditions, humiliating policies, awful experience. We've all been there, okay?
Yeah.
And the second thing they realized when they were turfed out, when they were told, sorry, you can't have a job anymore because we're freaking out about a virus, that there are other ways to make a living. There are other ways to get by.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they found those other ways. And now people are saying, well, why aren't you coming back to this pitifully paid, wretched job where we can abuse you again?
Right.
What's the problem?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to be a party to your own abuse anymore. Yeah.
Exactly. What's wrong?
Yeah.
And so they're freaking out because millions of people have figured out there's an alternative to, work till you die. And so this is an example of the kind of thing I was talking about with regard to the fantasy novels. Many people have slipped through the cracks. Many people have taken advantage of the possibilities of a declining society to make new lives for themselves. And it's a very real possibility for those who are willing to take it. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in the years ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope that is a trend that continues, man. Because nothing sucks worse than working a job that you hate. Just That job that you just dread going into, you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I have to do this all over again. There's no more like soul sapping experience than that. Yeah.
I would agree. I did it to some extent deliberately before I got published, when I knew I wanted to become a writer. And I knew I had to support myself. My wife and I, we got married pretty much right out of college, and neither of us at that point had any particular, large-scale job skills. So we went to work in the service economy. We had minimum wage jobs. We squeaked by. But the reason that I did that was that every time I would get home from work and there'd be the keyboard sitting for me, and I was not going, oh God, there's writing to be done. I was going, if I can get published, I can tell that job to go away forever.
Right. Yeah.
Motivation? Oh, yeah.
Well, it
worked.
I think it just all comes down to passion. I think if it's something that you're passionate about, if it's something that you actually care about, if it's something that you would do for free, then by all means, follow that. Follow your passion.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you, even when that's the case, sometimes you need a little extra motivation.
Yeah.
And a really miserable job waiting for you to remind you that that's what you get for the rest of your life unless you get to work on that novel.
Right.
That's motivation.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is like, you almost need the crap jobs in order to be the motivation to do
to find your passion. Yeah.
To find the things that will benefit you in the long run.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
If you don't want to be at a job that you're not passionate about, if you're working in a, using some of my past experience, I used to work in restaurants a lot, in kitchens, and just the last kitchen job I had. Granted, I worked with some cool people, and they're what made the job okay, but it was just okay. Most of the time, I hated the work itself. It was monotonous, and it was boring, and it wasn't stimulating at all, and it was ultimately not very fulfilling for me. It was just wasn't fulfilling for me. And because of that,
I get that.
Because of that, like, it made the job suck. Like, and I tried to reframe the way I looked at it several times, but at the end of the day, the job still just sucked, and I hated it.
The job sucked. Yeah, exactly. You can't lie to yourself. The job simply sucks. In my case, I worked in nursing homes for a while as a nurse's aide. I went from there to working as a microfilmer for a while. I did counter at a copy shop back in the days when we had copy shops, and also worked at a dry cleaner. Those were my crap jobs, and they varied in the amount of crappiness that they were, but they all basically sucked. And I got out.
Yeah, exactly.
I motivated myself, and if part of the reason why I learned how to write in volume and to spend a lot of time writing and so on is precisely that sort of pressure, that motivation to actually get out of this and get to doing something I actually love to do.
Right. So if you had to give somebody that was, perhaps listening right now, any advice on what they, if they're in that position, if they're in, if they have a dream that they want to, say they want to be a writer, or they want to be, a painter, or whatever they want to do, whatever they're passionate about, what would you suggest to them?
Okay. The first thing I would suggest is follow the dream. Put as much time into it as you can without neglecting things like paying the rent and meeting the needs of any people that are dependent on you. If you made commitments, you're married, maybe you have children, that has to take priority, obviously.
Right.
But follow the dream to the extent that you can. Put your time into it. Invest. You're not going to become a writer without spending a long time typing. It's not just going to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's George Sithers, who used to be the editor of Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. Many years ago, I was at a science fiction convention, and he was talking about writing, and he had this rule that I found really useful, which is every writer has a certain number of words of bad writing stuck in them. It's usually about 1 million. Okay, and the only way to get that out so you can get to the good writing that's underneath it is to actually write them.
Yeah.
And so you should plan on writing and stuff. Your early stuff will be garbage. Mine was. My early novels are dreadful.
I
And so, but
I love it.
yeah,
I love that.
but
I love that you can laugh about it. You know, like
oh yeah,
you have to.
yeah,
I love that you have the humility to be able to like look back at your early work and be like, oh man, it was awful.
Yeah, stinks on ice is an understatement here.
Yeah.
They were pretty bad, and you can tell that I read all kinds of extremely crappy fantasy back in the day.
Yeah.
But so you've got to do the writing. But the other thing, and this is something that you are going to be told by all kinds of people, oh, here are these authorities, listen to them. Here are these classes, here are these workshops, ignore them. Okay? All that they are going to do is teach you they're going to teach you one or two things. They're either going to teach you how to fail or they're going to teach you how to feed the corporate machine.
Right.
Because I've known way too many people who killed their talent by going to writing workshops and getting caught up in that whole thing and ending up producing this generic stuff that was what everyone else at the writing workshop was writing too. So they strangled their own voice. This is especially true in the visual arts, where you've got this immense fixation on ugliness for its own sake. There's a reason that nobody likes modern art. It's because it's lousy. Right. It's because we have this cultural insistence on that beauty is bad, that the meaning is bad, that that technical skill is bad. You should produce something that an unusually bored third grader could have put together, and then you put an artist statement on it that feeds into whatever the latest buzzwords are, and that's an important work of art. No, it isn't.
Right.
Follow your own guide. Learn technique if you can. Again, books are good for this. They don't argue with you. Learn as much technique as you can, but follow your own vision. Don't let yourself get bullied by authorities into following this trend or following that trend. If the people who were doing that were actually good, they'd be making a living writing or painting or what have you. They wouldn't be running workshops.
Right.
So those are the two things. And then the third thing is, this is specific to writing, but I suspect it's also true of other kinds of art. Don't edit while you're creating. The part of your brain that edits, that analyzes, that picks apart, is a different part of your brain than the part that creates, that dreams, that comes up with stuff. And if you try to use them both at the same time, they jam each other. That's what writer's block is. That's all that writer's block is.
Yeah, that
so
makes sense.
if you want to learn to write, you need to learn to shut up the edit, shut up the internal critic. Right. If you have to, tape a piece of paper over your computer screen so you literally can't see what you're writing.
Right.
And just write. You can always edit it later. Spend half an hour, or 2 hours just writing, and then spend other time doing the editing. The editing is a skill too. It's a crucial skill, and it's really one of the main differences between the halfway decent writer who will never get published and the successful writer who has books coming out. Good editing, but those are two different things, and you have to get the creative flow first. You have to give the creative flow its own time and space. So those are my 3 rules. Do a lot of pursue your dream, ignore the authorities, and don't edit while you're creating.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. Okay, so that brings me to another question that I had. It just kind of came to me while you were talking. So you said you concentrate on your vision, right? So we can also use the word voice for that. But what if somebody is struggling to say find their own voice? You said that your early work like pretty much reeked of the bad science fiction that you were
of the tacky fantasy that I read.
Right.
Exactly.
So and that was until you found your own voice, right? So what would you like? How did you go about that? How would you what would you recommend to say an aspiring writer or aspiring musician or artist or anyone who is trying to create as far as finding their own voice? What would you say?
Well, I don't know if there's any kind of special touchstone for this. I never found one. The thing that worked for me and that's worked for other people I know is just start where you are and learn your voice by doing the writing. So, you write, you do your first novel. We'll assume you want to write fantasy fiction because that's what we were talking about. Okay. You do your first novel and it reads like a 50-50 mashup of J.R.R. Tolkien and J.K. Rowling. Okay. Use it for waste paper. You write another one. it's still got, it's still got a chunk of, there's some Wheel of Time in there, and there's some, what Game of Porcelain Thrones or whatever it is, in there, but I'm not a fan.
I would have never guessed.
but there's these little things that some differences, some changes you've rung, and you can like them. Okay, and then you do another story, and here you're paying attention to those changes, and all of a sudden, the elves and dwarves and things, you've gotten rid of those, and the Hogwarts Academy references, those have sort of drifted away, and it's starting to sound like something a little different, and you like it, and you keep on working at it. And you keep on working, you work on this one, you work on that one, you write this, you write that, and over time, you suddenly realize, wow, I have a voice. This is not like anything else. This is not like anything else I've ever read. This is me. So you sort of have to stumble into it a little at a time. Again, there may be other ways to do it, but I noticed this a lot in early novels. I mentioned J.K. Rowling, who is kind of everyone's goal to be. People want to be that kind of fantasy writer. She's richer than Queen Elizabeth. Her first book was an international bestseller. The first book is really pretty derivative. She's got it's your basic English public school novel with a fantasy with some fantasy cliches woven into it. It's fun. But it was after that, as she started building on that she started picking up more of her own voice.
Right.
In the same way, look at any writer. The early stuff very often has a certain derivative quality to it, and as they pick up speed. I mean, my early writings were heavily influenced by Golden Dawn stuff. My first handful of my first two published books, especially Paths of Wisdom and Circles of Power. They're Golden Dawn magic. They're my own explanations of it, but it is. It's not that original.
Right. But
by the time I'd finished those two, I was getting a sense of what I wanted to do. I went on to the third book, Inside a Magical Lodge, and that one, it stayed in print very solidly, and because it broke new ground. And I kind of went from there, gradually experimenting with this, trying that, and away we go. And it never ends, of course. You always keep on developing your voice.
Right.
In the same way, in fiction. My first science fiction novel, The Fires of Shawshank. It's been one of the few people who reviewed it when it first came out described it as reading like Seven Samurai, sort of rewritten by Ursula Le Guin. But again, that was praise, but at the same time, there's some Le Guin in there, and there's certain other things that you can, if you know that end of science fiction, you can see where The Fires of Shawshank was coming from.
Right.
And then things proceeded, and the series that I finished just a couple of years ago, which is set in a sort of H.P. Lovecraft universe turned on its head, where the tentacled horrors are the good guys. It's fun. Very deliberately, the Weird of Hali is the title, and of the series. It ended. I was expecting to write a novel. Then it turned into 3. Then it turned into 7. And then it was a 7-novel series with 4 additional novels sort of packed around it, all dealing with in the same world. I did not intend that. But that's the way it happened. But, there I was really deliberately riffing off H.P. Lovecraft, who I've again, I like weird things, right? I adored his stuff from the time I was a kid. Yeah. But it started off with, okay, I'm going to have some serious fun in Lovecraft's invented world, his Cthulhu mythos, and then it started picking up its own tone and its own voice, and heading off in some rather odd directions, and away we go.
That's awesome, man. I think that's great direction. It's just do the thing, You
do the thing. Let the work guide you. Don't try telling your writing what to do or your art. Just let it guide you. It will do that if you give it the time and the effort.
Right. Yeah. I say some like this kind of thing that's along those lines all the time, and that's like just do the work and let the outcome be the outcome. It's like it's going to be what it's going to be. So. Yeah.
And that's a crucial thing, by the way. That's a crucial, of course, in all of life. Just doing the work. Don't worry about the outcome. The outcome will worry about itself. Concentrate on doing what you're doing as best you can while you're doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's crucial, but it's very important in writing. You don't worry about whether it's publishable. Just write the thing.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I assume the same thing is true if you're a painter, if you're a musician, if you're whatever. Do the best you can. Do your best job. Learn from the experience. Have fun, and see where it takes you.
Right.
You probably will not end up where you think you will. Most of the ups and downs and changes in my writing career were not my idea, and I was going, so how did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I think most of the changes in my life in general have been like that. It's just like, oh, how did I end up in this space now? It's like, oh, weird.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You just never know. And that's, people get into this notion of a mistaken notion of power. The idea that you should have control over things. You should decide what's going to happen and make it happen.
Right.
What a boring way to live life.
Yeah.
Instead, decide what you're going to do and then do it and see where it takes you. Much more interesting.
Absolutely. I like the unpredictability of that,
Mm-hmm. And since that's what's going to happen anyway, you might as well enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man. Those control issues, they can be pretty detrimental. I see a lot.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that have a lot of really, really bad control issues, and to the point where, they're not very nice about it, and I see the way that affects other people around me that I care about. And it's just like, and you want to say something to them, but you know that anything you say is not going to get through to them at all.
No. And the thing is, to some extent, our whole society has become fixated on this sort of managerial consciousness. The notion that if you've gone to college, you've gotten the degree, you know what the world is supposed to do, and now you just have to make it behave, and it doesn't. And you get increasingly frantic, and increasingly upset and angry and pounding your fists because the world is not a vending machine. You can't stick a quarter into it and get a candy bar out of it. And you say, here's the Zen master comes along with his stick and goes whack, if you think of the world that way. Right. The world is not a vending machine. The world is a living presence, and it is bigger and smarter and sneakier than you will ever be.
Right.
So you cannot manage anything. You can't even manage your life. Yeah. All you can do is, as we said, do follow your dreams, do your best, and see where it takes you.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned earlier, as far as we could talk about, with the hermetic gold, the order of the hermetic gold dawn, or with Freemasonry, you said that you were kind of drawn to the ritual of it, right? Mm-hmm. So, do you have a ritual for writing? Do you have any particular ritual that you do, or do you just have I'm going to write from this time to this time, or like? Well,
no, the thing is, I love writing. It's like, do I need a special ritual to get myself in the headspace for cuddling with my wife? No, I do not. Right. Do I need to, or taking a walk on a beautiful spring day? Do I have to psych myself up for that? No, right. I do not. Writing is the same way. It's a matter of, cool. I've gotten the other stuff out of the way. I have some time open from now until it's time to start helping out with dinner. I get to write.
Yeah.
So I'll, depending on my mood, because I usually have several projects going at once. Sun in Gemini, anyone? So I'll boot up the computer and bring up whichever Word file I'm slogging away on, and away we go. Right. And because I love doing it, and so it's just clickety 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 until I finally look up and notice what the time is and go, okay, well I guess I have to go help with dinner now. Right. So I'm not any help there for anyone who actually has to sort of psych themselves up for it. It's one of those things.
Understandable. Right on. Well, that's cool. I'm very into ritual as well. As far as some things are concerned, like I have a very like dedicated meditation practice that has taken on some ritualistic aspects to it that it didn't used to have, and I kind of picked those up from. I sit with a Zen monk occasionally. He doesn't beat me with a stick because he's a nice guy, but he's also very like
I can say you go to a traditional monastery in Japan, they'll whack you.
Right. None of that here. Okay. But he also preaches a message of peace, so he's probably not going to go around whacking people with a stick.
Whacking people with a stick. Okay, gotcha.
So,
you can tell that a lot of the Zen traditions had connections with the samurai back in the day. They were into whacking people.
Yeah, direct connection there for sure. Absolutely. But his practice is beautiful in the ritual, like it's so precise and it's so perfect every time that I've witnessed it. He does a recitation and a meditation twice a week that's open to the public, so I go sit with him, and I've gotten to know him over the course of the past like 5-6 months or so, which is I just met him like 6 months ago.
Sweet.
But and I've had a meditation practice for a long time, but I never really sat formally with a Zen monk, so it's a completely different thing going from, just sitting here and there and, having a dedicated practice where I'm meditating in the morning and at night, but taking that and then going from that to this very, very regimented, very ritualistic, very serious process.
And you put in the additional ritual elements, you put in the additional structure, and it really does change things.
It really does. It really opens up a lot of doors that I didn't even know were there before.
Yeah. One of the advantages that it can be a disadvantage in a way, but I'll get to that. One of the advantages that Western occult traditions have is that ritual it's where you start. If you're going to start working the Golden Dawn system, for example, the first thing you learn is a ritual called the Lesser Ritual of the Pentagram. And you practice it every day. And so typically, if you're a serious Golden Dawn, you'll be doing the Lesser Ritual of the Pentagram, and then you'll be meditating immediately afterwards in the space where you've done the ritual. So it has that framing process. It has that ritualistic beginning and so on. And it's really useful. In the system that I practice and teach nowadays, the one which I've learned, long story, from the second Druid order third Druid order I ended up joining. Again, there's a ritual called the Sphere of Protection, which it's kind of related in some ways, and it has a similar function. You do your Sphere of Protection ritual. You sit down, you do your meditation immediately afterwards. So it has that same framing effect. Of course, the downside of this is that a lot of people get into the rituals and they don't do the meditation. And this is something I keep on having to remind people that it's like trying to walk with only one leg. You can do it, but it's nothing like as smooth as if you use both your legs. So, the ritual is one leg, the meditation is the other. Here you have them. Go for a stroll.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't try to do it with just one leg, because it's not going to get you very far, right?
Oh, you can do it. You can do it. Most of us remember what hopping is like.
Yeah, but that's tiring.
It's tiring, exactly. So, use both your legs.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. Where can people find you at?
Okay, I can be found online at the best way is to go to my blog, which is ecosophia.net, ECOSOPHIA.net. From there, you can get to my Dreamwidth account, that's where I put smaller pieces, and that's ecosophia.dreamwidth.org. If any of our listeners who like to shop on bookshop.org, I've got a bookshop place. Nice. Just look up John Michael Greer, you'll find me.
Cool. Excellent. And I will drop links to that in the liner notes of the episode for sure.
Excellent. I'm delighted to hear it.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks again, man. I really do appreciate it.
I appreciate being on. I love being on podcasts. These are fun.
Yeah, they are fun. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I started doing it. I was like, that sounds like a fun idea. It's become more like work than other things, but it's that kind of work that I'm happy to do. You know, it's like, ooh, I get
there you go. Yeah.
Like I get to do a podcast. Excellent. I get to talk to somebody and learn some new shit. Yeah. Cool. Hey, can you do me a favor? I'm going to go ahead and cut it off probably right there. But, just, can you send, get your wife or whoever, to send me like just a brief bio and, like a hand
bio and a photo.
Yeah, photo. Yeah, standard issue. Any links you want put in there. It would be helpful if you could just post, put them in the message. That way, I don't have to try to chase them all down. Not a problem in the world. I will let her know. Absolutely. Thank you so much, man. It's been really fun talking to you. We'll have to do this again sometime. Do you have any books coming out soon? Always. Let's see. Soon is kind of a challenge here, simply because we're having the usual supply chain issues in the publishing industry. I just got an email from one of my publishers telling me that one of my books, which was going to be out at the beginning of February, will be out toward the end of February. Oh, wow. So I've got a book. Let's see, books coming out in the next little while. There's going to be there's a couple of reprints on their way. My book Monsters, which is on, surprisingly enough, Monsters, is coming out for its third edition. That should happen in a month or so. Right. There is The Twilight of Pluto, which is discussing astrology and what does it mean that Pluto has been downgraded from planetary status, and what does it symbolize, and so on. That's the one that's going to be out in February, and another one out in February is an introduction to Druidry for complete beginners, and it's titled The Druid Path. So if you drop an email to Sara and let her know that you're interested in new publications, she will get you on the relevant lists. Okay, cool. Excellent. Yeah, we may be able to get some review copies coming your way. Excellent. That sounds awesome. Cool. Thanks, man. Well, like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It means a lot to me. Anybody that's willing to give up an hour plus of their day just to have a conversation with me, I'm very appreciative of. No, it's the conversation is fun, and besides, on a purely money grubby level, this is free advertising for my books. What's not to like? Yeah, right on. Well, and hopefully you will post this podcast to your site. No, as soon as it's free advertising for my podcast. Exactly. Yeah. No. As soon as it's up, send the links to Sara, and I will get it onto my Dreamwidth journal, and my podcast listening fans all know that's the place to go. Absolutely, I certainly will, and it'll probably be out not this coming week, but the following week. Okay, that's for sure. Whenever. Excellent. When it is available, it will go up. Cool. Okay. Thanks, man. Have a great night. Thanks again to John Michael Greer for being on the show. If you would like to get in touch with him, he can be found at ecosophia.net. That's ECOSOPHIA.net. And his books are available wherever books are sold. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe. This has been Dharma Junkie. Thank you for listening. Namaste.